Okay.
Where am I?
Thank you. Real talent. They are surviving well, but in order to do so, they had to make changes in their lives. And I want to talk a little bit theoretically about the process of change. There are two basic kinds of things that happen when people are confronted with having to make adjustments in their lives. They can dig in or they can dig out. So there are what I call diggers in and diggers out. There are some people who will settle for pain because it is familiar pain, and the unfamiliar is scary to them. There are other people who will dig out of a bad situation and undergo some pain to come out in a different place. And I gave you in your handout pack, and by the way, I'm extremely grateful to the wonderful staff at Concord Hospital because I made a lot of work for them. In fact, I sent the bibliography up just this week, and Pat Cloutier, who's standing there in the back, typed it for you herself, and so that's why you have it. And I sent it up in a real mess, and all that. This work has been a lot of work for them putting together this program. If you look at the handout, you will see, and that I take the blame for, because it was Xeroxed from my terrible writing, a diagram that says at the top, older women's roles. And it shows, this is from a paper that I wrote this summer that was commissioned by the Southport Institute. I worked very hard on it this summer, and Southport mails it out for $3 to anybody that wants it. That includes the postage and everything. It's a foundation, so there. And they also have 5 other papers about older women, and you picked up the flyer on that as you came in, probably, so that you can send for those if you're interested. Now, if you notice, there are 4 possibilities here. Individual effort, perhaps with therapy, as the women were in this group, and were getting help from each other, plus societal opportunity. If you're in a place where there are opportunities, then you can have productive role change. Secondly, you could have a woman trying very hard without getting the assistance she needs. The assistance she needs might be so simple as money for a hearing aid or money for glasses. And we all know how Medicare is being rationed, HMOs are being rationed, there are cuts in services every place. Massachusetts, there are 10,000 less people getting home acres than 2 years ago because the budget has been cut. So there has to be societal opportunity. And if there is not societal opportunity, and that I wrote wrong, it should be no societal opportunity, then there is blocked access and no role change. And the second one, the first one says societal opportunity, the second should say no societal opportunity, and perhaps no assistance. In the third situation, the individual has effort with therapy, but there's limited social opportunity, and then some individuals succeed, but those who don't somehow feel it's their own fault. We were socialized to feel guilty, and so they have lowered self-esteem. In the fourth instance, there are individual efforts with perhaps therapy, but no social opportunity, and there's frustration, anger, no good role change, or a person can become a change agent and mobilize with others to fight for more social opportunities, which is exactly what Maggie Kuhn did when she founded the Great Panthers, because she had been fired because she was 65. She had worked very hard on her career and was willing to continue to, but nobody would hire her. And so she started this group, which became a national organization and which fought and succeeded in having the mandatory retirement age abolished for most jobs. Now, the process of social change, or rather individual change, is very complicated. And since I'm a sociologist, I have done some thinking about it, and I think there are 8 steps. This is explained in more detail in Be an Outrageous Older Woman. There's a chapter on identity change, but I'd like to give you the gist of it. Incidentally, a lot of you, because you're older women, don't have much money. Don't buy the book to make me rich. Tell your library about it and have your library get it, and then you can read it free, and so can lots of other women. And there are some flyers at the back table that you can take to your library and say, please get this for me. Here's the 8 stages. The first, involuntary loss or voluntary rejection of the old identity. It can be involuntary, such as the case of Mary, who was sitting here, whose husband dumped her for a younger woman. She didn't want to be divorced, but she was stuck with being a single. It can be involuntary. It can be voluntary if the woman decides she wants to get out of a bad marriage where she was abused, or where perhaps the man is an alcoholic, or for some other good reason. It can also be involuntary, as in the case of widowhood. And we had the woman who read the part in the play about being widowed. The second thing that happens after you lose your identity as a wife or as a worker or as a glamorous person, when people reject you because of your wrinkles and gray hair, is that we mourn our old identity. We mourn our marriage, we mourn our lost looks, we mourn our job, and that's necessary. We have to go through that. We can't not be sad, and we need to be sad. In fact, if you push down the sadness and you don't experience it, don't allow yourself to feel it, you may become depressed, in a clinical depression, and then you may need to go to a good therapist here at the Concord Hospital or someplace else and get help to work through your bereavement and the loss that you've experienced. You can't just pretend it didn't happen. You have to deal with it. The third thing that happens is we seek models or mentors on whom to patent a new identity. And part of my writing the play and the Outrageous book is really not to get rich, but to provide for some people in a written form some models of new ways of being, and that's why I run around speaking, because I try to be a model myself. And you also can find models in places like support groups, women who are caring for aging parents have, and I think it's here in New Hampshire, they have an organization called DAM, Daughters of Aging Mothers, and they meet once a week for breakfast. And they help each other. There are all kinds of support groups. I have a manual up back called Older Women Surviving and Thriving, which was published by Family Service America, a nonprofit organization, to help women who don't know how to become wonderful old women, because it was a different era in which their parents grew up. We are the first generation of women to live as long as we are. Women of 80 today are like women of 70 used to be. Women of 70 are like women of are now like women of 60. We have much more vitality. We are living so much longer. that we really can't use our own parents as models, so we have to go and seek them. And that's why I wrote that manual, because women can get together, hopefully women from 60 to 90 can get together in workshops, and the less successful ones can see how the more successful ones are doing. There's a curriculum of 12 sessions with 14 handouts to kind of go through a process. But you don't need to have a structure like my older women surviving and thriving groups. You can do it any way by seeking out people that are aging successfully, dealing successfully with retirement, with widowhood, with whatever crisis you're going through, divorce or whatever, and seeing how they do it. And we need to do that because it's hard to invent the wheel all alone. The fourth is developing and implementing strategies for change. We really have to figure out what we want to do and how we're going to do it. It can be something very simple. I was working with one woman who was extremely depressed. She'd get up in the morning, put on her bathrobe, and still be in it at 4 o'clock. And one of the strategies we worked out was that she would not do that. She would get up every morning, have breakfast, put on her clothes, and go to the public library and read the newspapers and magazines there. That way she was saving money, she was keeping up with the news, and there were other people hanging out in the morning, older people in the public library, and there were people she could say hello to, and often that led to going out for coffee with somebody or for lunch. Just a really simple strategy, but it got her out of the house every morning. It was her job to go to the library. And there are, of course, much more complex strategies that you can develop. I had one widow who was really sort of unable to throw out anything that had belonged to her husband. Her house was full of his presence. It was very sad for her. She couldn't change anything. She wasn't getting any exercise. She was just sitting there in utter despair. And we strategized that she was to go to an elder hostel, 3 elder hostels, in 3 months, 1 a month. It was the best money she ever spent because she found some models and mentors there, other widows who had to go through bereavement and were now making a life for themselves, and she learned how they were doing it. She also took some courses at the elder hostel, which turned her on to new things she could be studying and new hobbies. And when she came after the 3 months, she decided she'd take a course at the local state college where tuition is free to people over 60. The 5th stage is seeking confirmation by self and others of our new identity. That's a very hard one because sometimes others have an investment in keeping us the way we were. Sometimes our adult children want us to be mom and to go on baking cookies and babysitting for the grandchildren and not running around and getting involved in politics and organizations and traveling and doing the kinds of outrageous things that we need to do to be out of range. I remember a couple of years ago, I'll be 67 November 15th, and I expect birthday cards. Not really, I'm just kidding. But just about 2 years ago, I had an opportunity to speak in 2 places, Salt Lake City, Utah, and Taos, New Mexico. And I said to myself, I'm going to drive across the country. I've never driven across the country, although I've flown across a couple of times. And it'll be fun, and I have time. I wasn't teaching that semester, and I can stop and see national parks and do all kinds of things. My kids got hysterical. The way I got hysterical when they were 16 and wanted to go off and do things. And one friend of mine said a woman couldn't travel alone, and I thought I would die because she showed me an ad in a magazine where you could buy this male dummy and sit in it. Really? And the front seat to protect you. Well, I didn't buy the male dummy, and I said to my kids that I'll send you postcards. And it's an experience that I treasure. I kept a journal going across the country, and the journal is just full of all these wonderful experiences I had because I was traveling alone, and I traveled very cheaply. Now, I stay at youth hostels all across the country, and I recommend that you do that too. If you don't want to cross the country, just in New England. They're $7 to $10 a night, occasionally $12 a night. You're with people traveling from all countries. I stayed in one in New Orleans, and there were some wonderful people there from Holland, from France, from Africa. You may have to share a room, you usually do, and you have to share bathrooms, but you also get to share a kitchen. You can bring in your own food, you cook with other people. Instead of sitting alone in a motel room at night watching canned stuff on TV, you're with people, and it's exhilarating and costs so little. So you can go to youth hostels. American Youth Hostels has an office in Washington. Go to your library, they'll give you the address. I didn't bring it with you. They have senior memberships after 60. It's only, I think, 10 or 12, well, maybe 15 now a year. And then you can go stay at all these places. It's wonderful. You have to, when you do something like that, you have to fight, as I had to fight my children, because they want to keep you in the old identity. You want to be an outrageous older woman. If you want to experience the new freedom, you may have to fight your doctor as well. And those people who want to keep you sort of on the shelf or in the rocking chair. And it may be that you have to get some new people, some new kinds of friends, and surround yourself by people who will support you in your new identity. 6, you have to resist returning to the old identity. You probably all have an old bathroom that you've had 20 years, and it's full of holes and it's shabby and you don't want to throw it out because you're used to it. In the same way, we're used to our old identities, even if the identity involves being miserable. And we need sometimes to stay very firm about the changes we want to make in ourselves and our lives, and sometimes we need therapy to do so. 7, gaining increasing comfort in the new, and even joy. I didn't have room on this sheet to put everything in the new identity. It becomes more comfortable, we get used to it, and we're able to convince others that we are indeed the person that we want to be. At first, it feels like putting on a mask when you're changing. But eventually, you get used to it. And 8 is repeating the process all over again, because nothing is ever fixed. New contingencies arise in life, and we have to change our identities. Now, in changing our identities, we need helpers sometimes, and I've mentioned that in the diagram, and I also mentioned it as I talked. And helpers can either help us or they can harm us and not be helpful at all. And I'd like to show you 2 short scenes concretely of how we can be helped or harmed. And some of you in this room are service providers, and that's why you're here, and you're here to get continuing ed credits. How many of you are service providers? Okay, and the rest of you are here to get help for yourselves. And I have to apologize in some ways, because I'm speaking to 2 audiences today at the same time. And I'm trying, if I were doing a workshop only for service providers, it would be a little different. And if I were doing it only for people who are enjoying their aging, it would be different. So combining two. This may show the service, may annoy some of the service providers, because we're going to show two scenes, one in which a woman encounters a good helper and one a bad helper. Can I have my two women who are playing out the first scene for me? The doctor and the patient. And in this scene, you will see, just sit together over there, you will see how they think as well as their words. It's a simple-minded little play, and the doctor will say his words, and it happens to be a male doctor, though it's played by a woman, and then the woman, the patient, will say her words and what she thinks. In each case, after they say their words, they'll say he thinks or she thinks.
Hello, Mary. What brings you here today? He thinks she looks old and haggard.
Doctor, I just don't feel like myself these days. I'm not sleeping well. I'm tired all the time. I just can't get used to living alone since Ben died, and I miss him so much. I don't seem to do much with my days. I'm no good to anybody, not even to myself. My house is a mess. I forget things. Do you think I'm getting Alzheimer's disease? She thinks, I hope he doesn't think I'm crazy.
Mary, you know I gave you a good checkup a couple months ago. You are okay physically. A lot of widows get depressed. But Ben has been gone 2 years now. You have to pull yourself together. He thinks, with the cost of my office expenses and malpractice insurance, I have to schedule visits like this that are not full checkups every 15 minutes, so I better get out of here fast before the waiting room's back up.
I'm really ashamed of myself, but I really can't seem to pull myself up by my bootstraps. I thought you might help me. I didn't know where to turn. I don't like to burden my children or my friends. Anyway, most of my friends still have their husbands, and they're too busy to spend time with me. They don't understand. She thinks, maybe I do have Alzheimer's, and he doesn't want to tell me. He doesn't know anything about that.
I'll tell you what we're going to do, Mary. I'll tell you what we're going to do, Mary. I'm going to give you a prescription for something to help you sleep at night. And I'm also going to give you a prescription for something to take during the day that'll help your moodiness. I fight against this every day at work. If you get some rest and have a little help from the other pill, you should feel much better, he thinks. If she were younger, I might suggest therapy. But the medication will probably do the trick. He writes the prescription, then hands them to her. As he hands her the prescriptions, he says, maybe you expect too much from yourself. You are no young chicken, you know.
Doctor, I really don't like to take a lot of medication. She thinks, he must think I'm really bad off. Perhaps I am. Perhaps it is Alzheimer's.
Now, Mary, I am the doctor. Be a good girl. And give these pills a try. They are really quite mild. He thinks, maybe if I stand and walk her to the door, she will leave. He does so.
Thank you, doctor. Do the pills have any side effects?
Mary, don't worry so much. Everything will be okay. He pats her on the shoulder as he opens the door for her and beckons in the next patient. As Mary leaves, he thinks, boy, I'm glad I don't have many geriatric patients.
a great talent in this room. Okay, now we're going to replay it with another physician and another patient. Will they come up, please?
Hello, Eleanor. The secretary said you called and said you were depressed. I had her schedule you as my last patient of the day so we could have time to explore what's wrong with you. I'm not surprised to see you're still having trouble. It takes many widows a very long time to deal with their great loss. She thinks Eleanor looks very withdrawn and unlike the vital 70-year-olds I see around. She looks worse than many of my 80 and 90-year-olds.
Yes, I can't seem to pull myself together. I forget things, don't get much done, I'm tired, don't sleep well, my health is a mess. Do you think I have Alzheimer's? She thinks the doctor looks as if she cares about me.
You definitely don't have Alzheimer's. And all the tests we took at your last checkup show you're physically okay. You're depressed, and it's no wonder. But depression is curable. She thinks, I'm glad I've been reading some literature on widows because I think I can be helpful to her.
What do I do to stop the depression? She thinks, thank God it is not Alzheimer's. What a relief.
The first thing I suggest you do is join a widow support group. There's one in this town. Here's a pamphlet about it. I hope she accepts this now.
Oh yes, you told me about this when Ralph died. So did my minister, but I didn't think then that I wanted to be with a bunch of widows. After all, I had my old friends. But you know, they're so busy with their husbands, and they don't seem to invite me when they have couples over. Maybe I will try this group now.
Maybe it's time to make some new friends. You're an interesting, wonderful woman, and there are lots of women who would enjoy your company. You might even consider having another woman or two come live with you. With the cost of heating and all, it must be hard to keep up that big house. And the house must also have a lot of reminders of your dear husband. Maybe you would enjoy living in a retirement community where there are activities. Maybe I'm throwing too much at her.
Doctor, that is a lot to think about. How could I live with other people? How could I move? I feel overwhelmed.
You know, Eleanor, I have an idea. There's a wonderful social worker at Family Service who's been very helpful to women like you who have to make a new life after widowhood. If you find you need more help than the widows group, you could see her. Your health insurance will cover her fees. I'll write her name and phone on my prescription pad, and you can think about seeing her. In the meantime, if you find it helpful, you can come back and see me. She thinks, I better leave the door open in case this doesn't work and I have to try something else, maybe even medication.
What shall I do in the meantime about not sleeping? She thinks, maybe I should get some sleeping pills before I leave.
Eleanor, how much exercise do you get? How much coffee do you drink? What time do you go to bed? She thinks, I'm not going to give her sleeping meds at this point before trying some lifestyle changes.
Well, I haven't really gotten any exercise for a long time. I drink a lot of coffee and tea to try to perk up, and because I don't much feel like eating alone. I go to bed at 10 and try to stay in bed until at least 6, but I just toss and turn and get more depressed because I can't sleep. She thinks, guess I'm not doing things right.
Eleanor, I want you to take a walk every day, a good long one. Or go and swim at the YWCA, or if it's in Concord, the YMCA. If it's bad outdoors, go walk in a shopping mall. Also, I want you to sign up for the hot lunch at the senior center. There's some nice people who eat there rather than eating alone, and you'll get a cheap, well-balanced meal. They even have a van to get you if you don't feel like driving. At home, I want you to have some nourishing snacks, not just coffee and tea, which prevents your sleeping. And I don't want you to go to bed until you are ready to sleep. Stay up and watch the late shows on TV. Read, do chores, or whatever until you get sleepy. We don't necessarily need 8 hours of sleep when we're older. Try to find meetings and events to go to at night, maybe with new friends you'll meet in the widow's group. The doctor thinks, well, let's hope she takes that okay.
Thank you for caring about me, Doctor. You're right. I'll try to do the things you suggested. Maybe I'll think of things myself. I'm not so dumb, you know. Maybe it is time for me to go back to the volunteer work I did before Ralph got sick and I had to stop. Goodbye, Doctor. I'll let you go now. Thanks for seeing me so late so you could take time with me. I'm grateful to you.
Okay, you're all smart people, so I really don't have to tell you what was wrong with the first scene or what was right with the second. In Be an Outrageous Older Woman, there's also a scene, two scenes, one where Mr. Klutz, a counselor, practically destroys an older woman who comes to him looking for how to get back into the job market because she's been divorced, and although she's in her late 50s, it's absolutely essential that she get a job. And Mr. Klutz really takes her already low self-esteem and drives it into the ground. Then in the other scene, we don't have time to play that one out, so I'm recapping it for you. And then in the other scene, a very good counselor points out that she's part of a category, displaced homemakers, that there are programs for her, that she has more skills than she realizes from her lifetime of home management and child development, and he raises her self-esteem and gets her on the road. So there can be good helpers and bad in this process of creating older identities. And I'd like to share a couple of tools that I, as some kind of a helper, use. One, I have put this diagram because I didn't want to burden the staff here with doing too many handouts. It's just a little simple thing that you can draw up yourself and then Xerox as many copies as you want. And what you do is divide people's lives into three categories: work, family, and self. And you have people fill this out, or you help them fill it out, and you ask the question, and you can put it on the form: what did you enjoy when you were younger doing for your work? Whether it was work in the home, or it was paid work, or it was volunteer work. Fill it out here. And then, what did you enjoy doing for your family? And then in the third, what did you enjoy doing for yourself? Now, I'll have to tell you, a lot of women have a lot of trouble thinking of what they enjoyed doing for themselves because they were so busy doing for others in their work or with their family that they never got around to doing much for themselves. But you elicit this. Perhaps what people enjoyed with their work was not the work itself, but the structure. The fact that, excuse me, that you had to be someplace every day, and that you saw people every day, that you weren't alone, that you were needed there. And now they're retired. And you have to then find ways, when we do the bottom half, which is the task of the bottom half, is to say, what was the essence of it? If the essence of work was the structure and the companionship, how can you take the essence of that and do it in a new way? Maybe it would be through volunteer work at the Concord Hospital or someplace else. Look at all the plugs I'm giving them. Or maybe it would be through joining an organization where you have to go to a weekly luncheon. Or maybe it would be getting up and going to the library every morning and having some structure in your life that way. Everybody's is individual what people enjoy. But what you have to help them to do, if you're a helper, or if you're doing this sheet for yourself, is to say, how can I do it in a new way now that I'm older? In the case of the family, often after people identify what they like to do with the family, it boils down to the fact that they like to nurture people. They like to cook for a family. For instance, there's one woman in my town of Wellesley, Massachusetts, who really loved to cook for her husband and her children. But now her grandchildren are at a distance. She can only cook for them once a year. Her husband, unfortunately, has died, and there's nobody around to cook for. Well, we got her to start a program in her church where she makes a weekly meal for people who live alone. And they contribute a small amount of money toward the ingredients. And it's wonderful. They all know that once a week they can go and have this great meal and be with a group of people and be a kind of surrogate family. And she's thrilled because she's always looking for new recipes now. She's shopping for bargains for this meal so it won't cost too much. And it allows her to do in a new way what she used to do for her family. Some people who loved reading to their children and going places can become foster grandparents or work in other volunteer programs or just do it informally. Over half of mothers with preschool children are working now, and a lot of young families simply can't take the kids on expeditions or read to them or do some of the things that we who stayed home with our children, and I did for many years. I didn't go back to school until I was 40. I got my bachelor's when I was 40. So I was home with my little kids. But a lot of young women I know can't do that anymore, and sometimes I borrow their children and do things with the children. It might be just something so simple as going and getting pumpkins and carving the pumpkins with the kids. It could be something more complex that goes on over time. But how can you do the things you used to like do in a new way? And it's amazing how you can continue. There's one woman who was a great nurturer, did a lot of volunteer work, and she's homebound. And she was feeling useless. She said, I'm curling up and dying because I can barely take care of myself and I can't do anything for anybody else. Well, we got her on a telephone reassurance line. And every day she has to call up 5 people who are also homebound and make sure they're okay. And they have become telephone pals. She wakes up every morning knowing she's going to talk to 5 people, maybe give them a little advice, a little cheering up, and it really makes her life worthwhile. In terms of what you like to do for yourself, figure out the essence in this column for yourself or with your clients, and then down below, how can you continue? Let me give you an example. I once did a site visit at a Northampton, Massachusetts housing project for the elderly. It's a high-rise building, and there's a hot lunch program there. There's one woman who was so frail with a heart condition that she could only come down to the hot lunch 2 or 3 times a week. She happened to be at the hot lunch the day I was there. And she invited me up to her apartment after the lunch, and I went. And then she told me an extraordinary story. She had been a very active person. What she liked to do for herself was she was a nature walker. She liked to take hikes. She liked to bird watch. She loved to be outdoors. And now the only time she could go even downstairs to the hot lunch was 2 or 3 times a week. The rest of the time she was stuck in her apartment had a little porch, a little balcony, so she could get some fresh air. But she felt very frustrated because she could not do anything she felt about her love for nature until her nephew, who loved her deeply and was a smart guy. I never met him, but I know he was smart, because what he did was he went out and he bought her some nice drawing paper and some crayons, some really good crayons, not the cheap, ones that kids use. And he bought her some books with pictures of birds and scenes, and he suggested that she start drawing. And she said, "Tony, I haven't drawn since the 7th grade." And he said, "Did you like it?" "Yes," she said, "I used to like to draw." He said, "Why didn't you tell me that once?" And she began to draw from memory, as well as from the pictures and from photographs that people gave her and magazines and stuff. And she got very good. And pretty soon, people in the building, her neighbors, wanted her drawings. And she gave them away and got a lot of pleasure out of that, gave them to people for gifts. And it increased her social interaction, because now she could be a giver, not just a receiver. Another brainstorm by the nephew. He suggested that he would frame them up and put them in a local gift shop to sell. And he did. And she was not a Grandma Moses. She did not get thousands of dollars for these drawings. But they were colorful and quite nice, and people were buying them for $25 or $30. And she felt really useful. When I went to see her, she showed them to me, and I found one I liked, and I paid her $35 for it. And then, fourth flusher that I am, I saw another one with a hummingbird, and she said, "Well, it's too bad you can't have that one, because that one is sold." And I said, trying to make her feel that I thought her work was very good, "Oh, that's too bad, because I would have bought that too." And she said, "That's okay, I like you. You can take both of them, and I'll make another hummingbird." So that's an illustration of the fact there's no free lunch, because it cost me $70 at that nutrition site. But that nephew did not have this sheet of paper, but he figured out the essence of what she liked to do, and he helped her to achieve it. I think those of you in the room who are caregivers can think of lots of examples. In the book, I write about the woman who couldn't anymore go to the Boston Symphony, which she had liked. She used to have season tickets. This, of course, is someone who lived in the Boston area. And she couldn't drive anymore. It's also kind of dangerous around Symphony Hall now. And there were a lot of reasons why she couldn't go, and she mourned that. That was one of the few things she had done for herself. So what did she do? We worked over this sheet, and she figured out something. She got a very good hi-fi set, or she had one, and she had some lovely tapes or music, and she, instead of listening to it alone, because what the essence of a concert is you're not just listening to music alone. You're listening with people, you go with somebody, you talk about it before or afterwards. And she began to invite 3 or 4 people in her building. She moved into a retirement community to come at certain times and hear music with her. And she would serve them a cup of tea afterwards, and they would talk about it. And it was almost like going to a concert. It was a different experience than just listening to the music alone. There's lots of things. I'd like to tell you one more story, and that's of a woman who liked to cook for her family and felt kind of isolated in elderly housing that was new. You know, she didn't have a microwave, and if she'd had it, she probably wouldn't have baked a potato in it, because she always baked it in the oven. And it's very uneconomical to run 1 potato, right? In a whole oven for an hour. So she would bake 10 potatoes or 10 apples, and she would walk down the corridor of the housing project, giving one, knocking on the door, and giving one to each person. Made a lot of good friends that way. Increased her social interaction. So this is one tool. Another tool that I find works for some people is to get them to write journals. Never underestimate old people. Sometimes caregivers do that. They think we're all a little senile, okay? And that we can't do creative things. And in this book, I suggest a lot of creative things older people can do. I teach poetry writing to senior citizens and journal writing. And I have people who never did either of these things before. And in 4 weeks, they're growing great guns. I've been doing a series of 4 lectures at the Willows. We call it Wit and Wisdom at the Willows. And they made buttons that say Wit and Douglas Richards, who's here today, turned me on to buttons. Douglas is the one that distributes those buttons that say aging is a work, youth is a gift of nature, aging is a work of art, and you may have got one on your way in, and they're wonderful. And I personally have got thousands of them from him, and they're left a trail of them all over the country, because aging is a work of art, we have to work at it. And one of the things about my poetry groups and my journal writing groups and the course I'm doing at the Willows is once you give people these tools, they really know how to go with it. I did the second one yesterday of this 4-part series of this retirement complex. And at the first one, I told them how to write journals. And it's very simple. Just buy a notebook and start. Don't worry about the grammar. Don't worry about the punctuation or the spelling. Just write down your thoughts, your feelings, your experiences, your memories. You can write a private journal just for yourself, or you can write something that you can Xerox and share with your adult children, your friends. You can get together with a group of people and read aloud from your journals. We are repositories of great wit and wisdom by the time we get to our age. And there are lots of people, including the Schlesinger Library at Radcliffe, which are dying to have women's journals, especially older women, because we know social history. We have unfortunately lived through 4 or 5 wars. We have seen enormous changes in this country. And we have seen enormous changes in our family, and we're the family historians. So I've got a lot of people started writing their family histories. And it's a great gift to leave your descendants.